Hi guys, this is Brittany from Revolutionary Tactics, a medical marijuana staffing company for physicians. Today we're coming at you with a little bit of a different video. We have Bridget here today and she is going to give a patient testimonial that's pretty amazing. So, Bridget.
Thanks, Brittany.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Bridget LaCoury. I have 5 children with ranging disabilities from autism, ADHD, neurofibromatosis type 1, chronic recurrent multifocal osteomyelitis, and cerebral palsy. So over the past 2 years, I've stumbled my way through the process of landing into medical marijuana. In May of 2015, my daughter was diagnosed with a brainstem tumor and an optic nerve tumor. She was coming home from school and she was lethargic. She was tired all the time, having headaches. She was falling down the stairs. She couldn't hold herself up. She would fall off the toilet. I rushed her into Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and she was referred over to neurology. Neurology then referred her to oncology to treat what they said was a non-cancerous, inoperable brain tumor, as well as an optic nerve tumor. The protocol for that was 52 weeks of chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy that they used was carboplatin and vincristine. That was to stabilize the tumor and keep it from growing. We started June, I believe it was June, we started on the chemotherapy. We went in every week. I watched my daughter, she went from being a semi-normal 7-year-old to a child who was sick constantly, in pain, who wasn't sleeping well. When she was sleeping, it was too much or too little. She developed neuropathy from the chemotherapy. She developed migraines, abdominal migraines, and she also started becoming extremely nauseous. Through that process, chemo is a very overwhelming, very stressful thing to go through. Having an autistic child at home, they need consistency, they need stability, and they need to have real foundation of this is safe, nothing's going to change for them. And unfortunately, my son did not have that. He was 13 years old, and he was being moved from school to school so that we could be closer to different doctors. And then when we finally settled, I wasn't there. I was at the hospital with my daughter weekly. My daughter would have fevers that would send us to the emergency room in the middle of the night, and sometimes we would be there for 2 or 3 days. Throughout that, my son became overwhelmed and anxious. He would go to school and he would have meltdowns. And his meltdowns were that he would sit on the floor and he would cry. My son is 5'2", 135, 140 pounds. He's basically a grown man, and he's sitting on the floor and he's crying to the point where he's drooling and he can't function. During one of his meltdowns at the school, I should backtrack on that one actually. In November of 2015, my son went to school and I took my daughter off to chemotherapy. Later that evening, I got a call from the school telling me that they were bringing my son home in a school resource with a school resource officer. They said that he had attacked a school official. When he came home and I asked them what had happened, I got this generic story that he had been sitting on the floor crying and that resource officer asked him what was wrong. And when he didn't respond, that they had called the vice principal to come and talk to him. And when the vice principal had arrived, that he had attacked her. Throughout the whole process of going through the tribunal, I had learned that what actually had happened was the school counselor who had told how to deal with this problem had left my son in the hallway crying on the floor. She went to the office to deal with a parent. The school resource officer then came out and found my son sitting on the floor crying, to the point where he had laid down and started drooling on the floor. When they asked him what was wrong, he didn't respond. The school resource officer then called for the school counselor, who said she didn't have time to come down and deal with that. Mind you, she's right up the hall dealing with a parent. So their response to that was to call the vice principal. When the vice principal came, we had learned later on that she was the reason why my son was having the meltdown to begin with. So my son became agitated at her sight, and he came up off the floor and said, "You stay away from me, you stay back." And when he came completely off the floor to a standing position, he had lunged in her direction and said, "Just stay away." And the school resource officer put his hands behind his back, cuffed him, and put him to the ground. And they brought him home, and they charged him with a simple assault. An autistic child having a meltdown in a school is charged with a simple assault and then recommended for probation. We ended up going through the probationary process, and we had an amazing probation officer who he really couldn't understand why my child was there. He didn't feel like that was the appropriate place for him. But I think it was that at that point in time when I started to realize that maybe the life that I was living at this point just was not the best life for my son. Well, I started considering at this point to maybe send him to go live with his grandparents. It wasn't until December 18th of 2015 that I made that decision. I woke up that day and it was any normal day that you would have getting ready for Christmas. So by 3 p.m. that day, I'd received a phone call. It was my brother, and he'd called to tell me that my sister had passed away. When I asked him what happened, he said he was unsure, but that they knew that it was related to narcotic pain medications. We later learned that it was an accidental overdose on pain medication she had been taking from her recent surgery. It was a very difficult time in my life. Not only did I have my son who was going through so many different things in the school, and my daughter who was sick constantly from the chemotherapy, I also had a child at home who suffered from a rare autoimmune disorder that basically caused his white blood cells to attack themselves. He had inflammation and pain in his bones. He wasn't able to walk on his own. I had to carry him everywhere as he went. I basically had a baby who was the size of a 2-year-old. He couldn't eat. Like, he would eat, but he didn't eat well because the medication that he was on to treat that condition made him sick. I became extremely depressed, and I had to realize that maybe I was not the best thing for my son. So I called my mother and I asked her, could she take my son to come live with her and be able to take care of him properly and be there for him and be a support system and kind of keep him on track and keep him from ending up in the juvenile system, which is where he was headed if he stayed with me. And it wasn't because he was a bad kid, it was because he was autistic with behaviors, and there was no treatment that really worked for rage behaviors for him. He's a high-functioning autistic, but his rages, they lead him to be in dangerous positions. He ends up running into traffic, he ends up running away, he ends up just seeming to be aggressive when he's really just trying to get his space. And unfortunately, that kind of behavior had landed him in legal troubles. So I felt that the best decision for him was to move 800 miles away from me, where he could be cared for properly by, there were six adults that were capable of caring for him in my mom's house. April 5th, well, actually let me backtrack. December 30th, I took my daughter in for her chemotherapy appointment, and within 5 minutes of the chemo beginning, she came to me and she said, "Mom, the chemo's making me cough." Her skin was kind of pale, her lips were turning a little blue, she was coughing, she was having a difficult time catching her breath. So I yelled for the nurses and I said, "There's something wrong, something's wrong." And I don't know that they really heard me, I don't honestly remember, but I watched as she became almost translucent and she couldn't breathe, and then she started to turn blue. And at this point I'm yelling, something's wrong, something's wrong. And the nurses, they come in and they're getting her in the chair, and all I'm hearing is she's anaphylaxis. And at this point I had no idea what that was. So they rush in and they get her an EpiPen and they put her on oxygen, and then they go and get a doctor and they start IV Benadryl. And they explained to me that what was happening to my daughter was a rare reaction to the carboplatin that she was on, the chemotherapy. That she was allergic to it, was causing her airways to close up on her, and if they didn't get this medication in, she would die. That was very traumatizing, experience. We spent New Year's Eve in the hospital. We had amazing people at the hospital. Took my daughter out to the roof of the hospital and let her watch the fireworks. And, I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat up and I kept thinking to myself, there's got to be a better way. This can't be it. This can't be all. My whole life is falling in around me. My sister she's died from pills, from medicine that doctors say, you need to have. My daughter almost died from medicine that they said she needed to have. If she didn't do the chemotherapy, she was risking blindness in her right eye and possible neurological issues. As I sat there and thought about it, I thought, well, gee, blindness and neurological issues are a lot better than death, right? So I started doing some research, and I heard about cannabis oil. I was looking into it. I wasn't taking it too seriously because it didn't. To me, at that point in time, it's marijuana. It can't possibly be a medicine. It's a drug. That's what I was always told. It was a drug. Well, April 5th, I took my son up to New York to live with his grandparents. And a few days later, I got a phone call stating that my stepfather, my dad, had been diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer and that he wasn't going to live much longer. My family had been through a lot. We'd been through a lot. So my brother started doing some research too, and he found Rick Simpson online. He found his story. And he called me and he told me, this guy cured his own cancer, and what can you do is there anything that you can do to help us find it? And I told him, I said, I'll ask the doctors down here, because I knew that Georgia had a law that said cancer patients could have cannabis oil. So I took my daughter into the doctors and I said, hey, what's this with the cannabis oil? I was like, one, could my daughter have it, because she's going through the chemotherapy process, and the nurse said no. She said my daughter didn't qualify for cannabis oil as a medical treatment because she wasn't end stage. She wasn't an end stage disease, yet their treatments almost killed her. That made a lot of sense. So I went online and started more research. And through a series of forms I filled out and phone calls that I made, I was able to find a company that was willing to ship us medication. We got medication for my dad. He's doing much better. He's not cured, but he's much better. He's actually stage 3 at this point. My daughter, she started her new chemotherapy with the cannabis oil, was off all 8 prescriptions. I think it was 8 prescriptions that she was on. She didn't need any of those within a week. Within 2 weeks of starting cannabis oil, she was back to school full time. And 9 months later, has not missed a single day of school related to her medical condition, which is unheard of for her. Her entire school life, she has missed upwards of 2 plus 3 weeks from her illness. Not this year. She's only missing for doctor's appointments or a common cold. My son with cerebral palsy, day 1 with his cannabis oil, he got off the floor and walked. By day 6, he was walking like a normal kid.
You can go back down?
Or back down?
You want to run? Go ahead, you can run. And you can walk back. Say day 9.
Denied. No.
He wasn't even in pain, and he was eating. He was eating full meals. A kid who wasn't eating, at all. He's eating full meals now. I never got the chance to give my son cannabis oil, my autistic son. I would love to have that opportunity. Currently, I'm not going to be able to do that. And he can't come home if the new law that's been put into place stays the way that it is, because he wouldn't qualify. None of my kids qualify. Right now, I illegally treat my children with a cannabis oil, and all of their doctors are completely on board. They say that it's working and to keep doing what we're doing, but they can't tell us that they can sign a recommendation or a registration card for us at this point. A lot of people don't understand why this works so well, and some days I kind of question, like, why is this such a miracle medicine? Why does it work so well? One of my biggest passions is educating. I really feel like if we can educate each other, that we can make a difference, that we'll be able to get farther faster, and people will be able to understand why cannabis works. Every person is born with an endocannabinoid system. Your brain has CBD and THC receptors, and probably many more that we don't even know about at this point. When you ingest the compounds in the cannabis plant, THC or CBD, it attaches to those receptors in the brain. CBD is known for having anti-inflammatory properties. It also is a natural muscle relaxant, and it also helps to fight tumors. THC is good for pain, it's good for nausea, it's good for fighting cancer. When you combine those together, a lot of times it solves so many problems. If you have arthritis and you have inflammation, you take CBD, it's going to work on the inflammation. You take the THC, it's going to work on the pain. It just makes sense to put those two together. So the CBD also works with the cerebral palsy because it's a natural muscle relaxant. My son had tight muscles. It allowed his muscles to be able to relax long enough for him to be able to get up and move without stiffness, without the pain. If cannabis oil had been an option for my daughter in the beginning, she never would have needed chemotherapy. The whole goal of the chemotherapy was to stop or reduce the tumor, to keep it from growing, to minimize the symptoms. CBD is a natural, it fights tumors. So does THC. Giving my daughter those two medications could have done the same thing that the chemotherapy done. It would have stopped the tumor from growing, if not made it smaller. It would have stopped her from having the migraines that she was having, and she would have been able to avoid chemotherapy altogether. So for Jackson, the reason that the cannabis oil worked so much better than the naproxen and Zantac that he was taking is because the naproxen was just an NSAID medication. It wasn't really working on anything other than maybe some inflammation. What it was doing, however, was upsetting his stomach and making it for him to be unable to eat. So we gave him Zantac to try to calm his stomach down so that he could eat, but he still even then didn't want to eat. When the cannabis came in, it stimulated his appetite, making him want to eat. It got rid of all those upset stomach feelings that he was having so that he was able to eat. And it gave him a little bit of freedom. I mean, he was able to get off the floor and move. He felt like a whole new person. He wasn't just sad and miserable anymore, you know. He wasn't just existing at this point. He was happy. For my daughter, she was on she was on gabapentin. Gabapentin is a medication that's used for neuropathy. Neuropathy is a burning pain sensation. It's quite unbearable for a lot of people. By the time she had gotten to 7 months into the chemotherapy, she was on 300 milligrams of Neurontin or gabapentin in the morning, in the middle of the day, and 600 milligrams at bedtime. That is a maximum dose allowed for a child, and it is a lot of medication, a dangerous medication. And all that did was calm the nerve pain. I don't really know, the side effects on that one it was kind of hard to decipher, was it the brain tumor or was it the medication that was causing the problem, because she was getting dizziness and kind of feeling groggy from that medicine. So we didn't know, was it the chemotherapy, was it the brain tumor, was it the medicine? So we just kind of stayed the course, and the next recommendation from the doctor was going to be Lyrica. Lyrica for me is not a safe medication for a child. I don't feel that it would ever be a safe medication for a child. She was also on 2 separate anti-nausea medications because the Zofran wasn't working alone. She was also she had to take Periactin for migraines. Periactin is also an appetite stimulant because of the chemotherapy. And those made her kind of tired, and she didn't have a lot of energy, and there was just some days she just didn't want to do anything because she didn't feel well. These medications were supposed to help the symptoms of chemotherapy, but it seemed like every time she got a new medicine, she had to take a new medicine to combat the symptom of another medicine. So when we gave her the cannabis oil, not only did it stimulate her appetite, controlled her migraines, helped her to sleep, got rid of her neuropathy, it gave her energy and got her back to school. I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be a better choice. Not to mention the biggest reason why we would want that is because it's controlling the growth of that tumor. Those tumors aren't growing, they're stable. She's been off chemotherapy for a year, her tumors are still stable. If I was able to give my autistic son this medication, I would 100% believe that it would control his rages. I don't think that the Abilify that he took for 7 years really did that for him. It helped him to socialize and maybe be in a school setting that was a little bit easier for him. He also did a lot of therapies to help with that. But if he had been given the cannabis oil, it would have released his anxieties, it would have calmed him down naturally, and he wouldn't have felt the need to be so overwhelmed and so anxious about things he couldn't control. And I can't say for certain that that would have happened, but I truly believe that that would have happened. And I believe that it should have been an option for me to try before having to ship my son 800 miles away and not know if I'm ever going to be able to bring him home. So what can we do together to change this? One, it starts with our doctors. Our doctors have to speak up and they have to say, you know, there are safer options. Let's try this first and not just throw us down the chemotherapy road or this medication or that medication. It's dangerous. It's been proven. People are dying. You can, if you're not a doctor, as a patient, you can tell your doctor, listen, I'm just going to do this. It's really not up to them. I go to my doctors. I didn't ask my doctor for permission to treat my child. I told them I was treating my child because it was what was best for my child. If you don't have children, you're not a patient, support your friends who are. Go out to a normal meeting. Go out to your local organization, call your representatives, send an email. If they don't answer that email, go to their office, call them on the phone, don't give up. The only way we're ever going to be able to get this to change is by speaking out. And if your representatives don't want to listen to you, don't re-elect them. It's that simple. You start a campaign that says, listen, they're not listening to me, they're not listening to you, it's time to replace them. We can do this together, we can do this.